Hey everyone, this is Carrie Magro, a professional speaker, best-selling author, and autistic self-advocate, and I'm really excited tonight to get the opportunity to interview Nicole LeBlanc. Now, Nicole was diagnosed with autism when she was 21, and she wears many hats within the autism community today. But for today's presentation, we're going to be talking a little bit about Women's History Month as well as Developmental Disability Month, being both of them are in March. Nicole, how are you doing tonight?
Good. Had a busy day, productive.
Nice.
No problem.
So, Nicole, tell us a little bit about your initial diagnosis of autism and what you're currently doing today.
I got diagnosed with autism when I was 21, when I went to a program called Job Corps, which was a nightmare. Well, one lesson for parents of children: do not shelter and overprotect your kids. It'll backfire in the real world. I went to this, it was a residential program, job training program. I endured a bunch of teasing, bullying, particularly because of my skin disorder, which is called epidermal nevus syndrome, and caused, odors at times. I had to deal with a bunch of people, saying insults, and the staff there all of a sudden see me struggling to function, and they're like, "Here, go see this psychologist." Even though I had given them my documentation from high school. And then, what do you think of the idea? And this therapist says, what do you think of the idea of doing testing to see whether or not you have Asperger's or autism or whatever you want to call it? And at that time, I ended up getting a diagnosis of PDD-NOS, which I'm so glad that term, pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, is gone. Just calling it autism spectrum disorder is enough. Otherwise, now it's ASD.
Absolutely. Now, sorry, Nicole. So what do you do today? Obviously, you wear many hats. I saw that you were a disability advocate coordinator for a little bit. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing today.
Well, I currently live in Silver Spring, Maryland. I'm a PAL group coordinator for the National Center Advancing Person-Centered Practices. I'm a self-advocate advisor for AOD, Administration on Disability Employment TA Center, TASH. And then, of course, I do a bunch of other little consulting gigs.
Nice.
My dream job is public policy, and I haven't been able to. I've had no luck.
Yeah. So, Nicole,
my consulting rate is $30 to $50 an hour.
Yeah.
Open your business.
So, Nicole, obviously, Women's History Month, there have been so many incredible autism advocates who have supported our community who are women. Who are some of your role models within the autism community, specifically girls who are on the autism spectrum?
Dina Grassner, one person I know. Then, of course, I went to college with somebody with autism. As far as Julia Bascom, Sam Crane, and the ASIN crowd.
Nice. That's awesome. And obviously in our community, boys are diagnosed with autism 4 times more often than girls. What has been your experience, especially when it comes to helping girls being diagnosed with autism?
Well, I think one reason why, it's more, often diagnosed easier or quicker in guys is because, women, we tend to, camouflage, we tend to cover things up. We're better at faking, acting normal. And then, of course, if you're somebody who's grown up with, overprotective parents, you've been sheltered, where you always had one parent stay home, one parent work, one parent stay home, work, rotate. Like, I never really had many babysitters as a kid. I did, Upreach Therapeutic Riding Center, all these little Special Olympics, and these little special programs. But other than that, I never really had much, I never did chores, everything was always taken care of. And then I go to this program called Job Corps. All of a sudden it's like, okay, is this how people act in the real world?
Hmm.
teasing, constant name calling. My only friends during elementary school were teachers, and everybody always assumed, oh, that's because of my skin disorder, which is epidermal nevus syndrome. The rare skin disorder. It started as a birthmark when I was 2 and then grew up. And when I was younger, it used to get inflamed due to, poor diet and whatnot, and gave off an odor, which would ultimately lead to name calling, bullying.
Let's talk a little bit about that. Bullying is such an epidemic that we currently have in the school systems, and those with autism are more likely to be bullied compared to their non-disabled peers. When did bullying start for you, and what are some tips you would give to somebody who has been bullied because of their autism diagnosis?
Well, during my elementary schools, I quite often teased a lot. People said, oh, right, I hate Nicole LeBlanc on the bathroom wall. People would just they'd stare at me because I was always, weird, even though, I was always outgoing and all that, which I think that's partly why I was diagnosed. I didn't get an autism diagnosis till I was 21, is because as a kid, I was always outgoing, happy kid. I wasn't, unlike my sister Megan, who's shy. She got depression, anxiety in 10th grade. We're like the exact opposite of personality. I'm the, confident, cool, collected, footloose and fancy free, and she's more the shy, lacking self-confidence.
Yeah. So, Nicole, bullying again is such a big issue, and you mentioned masking, especially girls seem to be.
The fact that in our society is I would say less understanding and maybe not as forgiving when it comes to dealing with people that are so-called labeled higher functioning that don't have more obvious disabilities. When you look at our society and our social norms, standards.
So masking can be different for a lot of people in our autism community. What were some of the ways that you tended to mask your autism diagnosis?
When I was a kid, I think, just being overprotective. I think just my parents, being overprotective, always hang out with adults, those are the safe people. They won't tease, and, they're more tolerant of people that, that have less obvious disabilities. Because, how many times have we all heard, oh, you don't look autistic? How many times have professionals say, oh, you open your presents like a 2-year-old? And all that. And that whole double standard, you look at our, the expert model mentality. Some professionals say, oh, you need to know how to clean your room before you can, go get a job or whatever.
So, Nicole, that's actually really a great point. I get you have autism, but you don't look like you have autism all the time. What is one thing that you should not say to somebody who has autism?
Well,
minus that one.
Well, as a society, we need to stop using the term high functioning, low functioning. The only reason why those terms are around is to deny services. And look at the data. People that are labeled high functioning, people that get told they have higher IQs have higher rates of anxiety, whereas people that that are told they're more severely autistic and who have labeled or given the label like low functioning, they in some cases, like I know one person who he's a neat freak, he's conflict collected, where it's like me, it's like I'm the exact opposite.
Absolutely. So, Nicole, tell us a little bit about
those labels do not match, are not accurate when it comes to determining levels of need and levels of support. Like, yeah, I may have an 90 IQ, but yet if you live with me 365 days a year, I'm disorganized. I'm not a neat freak. Unlike some people I know with more severe autism that are more Mr. Organized.
Yeah.
So that at a restaurant, we have the cooking, the cleaning, and dealing with all the day-to-day living skills.
Absolutely. So, Nicole, what would you say was one of your greatest challenges growing up on the autism spectrum. Mine was being nonverbal for the first few years of my life. And what, up to this point, would you say has been one of your greatest accomplishments in your life?
Well, the challenge is obviously the fact that, as a kid, I'm somebody, no professional has ever been able to, find one diagnosis and fit me into a box. I've never been that kid who you can just stick into a box. Like, part of the reason why I don't think I got to 21 is because, I don't fit the normal profile. I was always outgoing, happy kid, always, go hang out with the teachers. I always assumed, because of they never thought to, investigate, autism, which, I remember reading, encyclopedia when I was in elementary school. Autism is a condition commonly found in boys. It's a boy disability. And then, of course, you got sleep issues, which, as a kid, it took my parents forever to get me to sleep in my own bed. And then, of course, as I got older, insomnia and all that, being able to sleep through the night is a challenge.
Yeah.
After it's gotten worse, one gets older.
Yeah.
As the sleep starts old.
We have some comments from people coming in and saying that they were also diagnosed with autism in adulthood. So you're definitely not alone. Lisa writes, hi, Lisa. Yes, my DGG was outgoing, so I was told it could not be autism. Yeah, that's so heartbreaking because there's so many people in our community who go without a diagnosis because of the fact that a lot of people still see autism as that Rain Man disorder. They see it only in boys. They think everyone with autism is great at math, and that when they turn 21, you could bring them to Las Vegas with you, and they would win you a lot of money on the blackjack tables. So it definitely seems to be a big challenge we have in our community.
Well, you've met one person with autism. You've met one person with autism. Yeah,
absolutely. I could not agree more. Nicole, so obviously we just had an election. What if you were president for just one day? What would you?
Well, that's easy. This pandemic would not be out of control. Knowing that this threat was coming in 2017, ideally, if everyone with the whole autism world ruled the world, the way, I would have handled this pandemic is, okay, 4 years, I would have just day one made an announcement. 4 years from now, there's going to be a massive virus. We all need to start, slowly practicing physical distancing. We need to start wearing masks all the time during flu and cold season, which I think, long term, I think, if wearing masks during cold and flu season is going to become the norm. When you look at how much right now flu has been non-existent, if we did that, we could get rid of colds, flus.
Well, Nicole, what I was going to say is,
I would have started, having all, businesses and all that. Okay, let's all start teleworking. Let's all start invest in ventilation, everything.
And Nicole, what I was going to end my question on was, if you were president for the day, what would you like to see done for the disability community?
Simple. Close all segregated settings. Make HCBS, home and community-based services, an entitlement. No more of this IQ. No more of this, being at risk of institutionalization. Just because you have a high IQ isn't always what it's cracked up to be. People that have higher IQs have struggled more in adaptive behavior in terms of daily living skills. People that have higher IQs are more likely to have, anxiety issues, coming from a family where there's a history of mental illness on both sides. I have a cousin, Kimmy, who committed suicide at 24. She had cancer at the time.
I'm sorry to hear that. So, Nicole, obviously, one of the things that I love that you just said there, and some people are writing in the comments talking about how different their childs are who are diagnosed with autism. So for everyone watching tonight, again, my name is Kerry Magro. Feel free, if you would like to ask Nicole a question tonight, feel free to write in the comments, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can tonight during this Facebook Live. So, Nicole, for people who are watching at home who might want more resources on how to become an advocate for their child who's on the autism spectrum, what would be some ways that you would go about doing that? Are there any websites that you regularly go to?
Well, people should look at Green Mountain Self Advocates, Autism Now Center, SARTEC, Self Advocacy Resource Technical Assistance Center.
And do you know the website names for those? Do you know the specific link to those?
Yeah, I can put it up.
It's all good. I was just curious if there was anything in particular that stuck out to you. Nicole, let's talk a little bit about Green Mountain Self Advocates. You were the advocacy director there. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about what you did as an advocacy director in Vermont?
Policy, stopping budget cuts in developmental services. As you know, they say, okay, we gave you 8 million new caseload last year. Why do you need more? One thing many people don't get, when you close an institution, you always need new funding every year because people live longer. It's not like you're paying for a building that's, stuffed over there in the corner.
Yeah.
Yet if we look at, in one thing as a society, we need to stop saying HCBS is cheaper than institutions when really it isn't. The only reason why HCBS currently is cheaper than segregated settings is because we pay crappy wages.
Now, Nicole, for people who don't know what HTBS is, can you explain a little bit about that?
Home and community-based services. Right now, we need advocates calling and demanding Congress fully fund home and community-based services in the next stimulus package. So call your delegation and bring the heat and end sub-minimum wage, please.
I love that. Go ahead, Nicole. Sorry.
Minimum wage is slavery, paying people with disabilities pennies.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Nicole, obviously we met the first time via the Autism Society of America. Who are some organizations in the autism community that you would recommend supporting?
Autism Society, Autistic Self-Advocacy Network.
Now, obviously, there are a lot of people who have some criticism over the organization Autism Speaks. What are just some of your initial thoughts about Autism Speaks, and just what are some things that you hope that people understand about their organization?
Well, the reason why there's so many people out there that don't like Autism Speaks is because they have a history of all being about curing autism. I once attended an IAC meeting, which is Interagency Autism Coordinating Committee meeting, where I heard people bad-mouthing Healthy Human Services, saying being autistic is the equivalent of having cancer. Being autistic is not having the equivalent of cancer. This pandemic is cancer. If you want to compare anything, compare the COVID virus, Alzheimer's disease, to cancer. I wouldn't be comparing autism to cancer. If we would just focus on providing services from birth to adulthood, then maybe, being autistic and raising kids and adults with autism, wouldn't feel so burdensome.
Yeah, I agree.
Is more or less disabled based on their interactions within the environment. If we all live long enough, we will all join the disability club. Everybody, and all you parents, you're only temporarily able-bodied, some would say, and that's what this pandemic is teaching us.
Yeah,
it's stimulating to the non-disabled world what it's like to be autistic, live with anxiety, ADHD, what it's like to always be on edge, hypervigilance. What it's like to have difficulty concentrating. How many of us have had concentration get worse during this pandemic? Raise your hand. That should be most of us in this room.
What are some tips you would give to families who have a child who's currently struggling with COVID-19 and the routine change?
What tips would I give?
Yeah.
Well, well, the most important thing is give facts. All this fake news and all that. March 13th will be the 1 year anniversary of this, massive pandemic started. And I suffered my first March 13th of last year. I woke up and I suffered my first panic anxiety attack. My heart was pounding, spreading, hot flashes. I'm like, what the hell's going on? This ain't menopause. Oh, and it literally felt like having a heart attack. I ended up going to the ER. Well, that was the most terrifying day of my life. It's like I've never had a panic. Usually if I'm truly anxious, I'll have seizures. I have psychogenic non-epileptic seizures, which that's a condition that's quite often people who have that are, to spend years diagnosed with epilepsy when they don't actually have epilepsy in the first place. And psychogenic non-epileptic seizures is often found in people with undiagnosed autism.
Yeah. So
focus on, facts, and, masquerading, that's big thing, and let's stop calling it social distancing, call it physical distancing. Let's be transparent, because really what we're doing is staying away from people.
I love that. I've been saying physical distancing for since
right now, now, anytime I see someone without a mask, I'm like, boom, like walking on somebody's yard. If I'm, coming from the grocery store, I'm like walking on somebody's yard. And, and right now I've started, lately double masking, buying N95 masks, which right now they say for everybody in this country wore N95 masks, you could shut this crap down.
Yeah. So, Nicole, we have a question that came in from Elaine. Hi, Elaine. Nice to see you on tonight. She asked you, what are your thoughts on the terms neurodivergent and neurodiversity as it relates to individuals with autism?
Well, it's an interesting, complicated term. So maybe not always the most accessible, looking at it from the lens of the general public or for somebody who doesn't read at 10th plus 12th grade level or higher.
Yeah. What are some of just your initial thoughts when you hear the words neurodivergent and neurodiversity when it comes to autism?
I don't know. People, to be autistic means to be amazingly unique, totally interesting, sometimes mysterious.
Yeah. So we have another question that came in from Julia. Hi, Julia.
It's like one of the gifts of autism is, we tell it like it is. We don't lie.
It's true.
Like that would not be happening. Like if there's one thing I've learned the last 4 years, lying is the one thing, I despise the most. Like when I was younger as a kid, if you lie, you were like, you're grounded. Get to your room, kid. I grew up with that mentality of, okay, if you lied, get to your room. It's like, come on, and yet we've seen people getting away with it. Like, okay, what happened to manners here?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had another question come in from Julia. Hi, Julia. Julia is a big supporter of our nonprofit. So for people watching at home, this is part of my 501c3 nonprofit organization. So if you would like to give back to our organization, we do weekly videos highlighting self-advocates, but also do a scholarship program for students with autism to go to college and so much more. So I'll include a link at the bottom if you would like. If you have anything to spare at all, that would be amazing. And Julia writes, what are your thoughts on supported decision-making and national legislation to support it?
We need it. It's time to move away from guardianship. There's too much of it. And studies show, supported decision, the more self-determination a person has, the better their mental health, and the better health and life outcomes they have compared to those that are under full guardianship. The fact that in some states, like down here, you can, if you have a guardian, you can lose your right to vote. Like, come on.
Yeah.
And it's time for the school guardianship pipeline to end. Like you don't need a guardianship to talk to somebody's doctor. There's many other ways around doing that. Like, how many times, for instance, as a kid, I never had my wisdom teeth taken out, which I ended up getting most of them done. I had 3 taken out during a pandemic, and during an emergency last April. And my first one I had taken out in 2018 at the dental school in Baltimore, Maryland. I just told the people down there, hey, call my parents and, figure everything out. And then they came down here. They were with me through the whole procedure.
Nicole, just out of curiosity, Elaine writes, can you explain a little bit about the definition of what supported decision making is, and maybe give a few examples of the differences between supported decision making versus guardianship?
For decision making, you retain your rights, and you're still a person. Like, you can still vote, whereas under guardianship, in many places you can't vote. For instance, an election. And like supported decision making it's like a little agreement, and you don't have to deal with all this, court stuff and all that. Like, they're just saying, okay, I want support. Okay, I want Susie Q over here to help. Okay, me balance my checkbook. Okay, I want help. Okay, understanding medical info and whatnot. It's like almost like a contract.
Yeah, that was really well said. That's how I would have explained it.
And we also, as parents, we need to start teaching our sons and daughters skills when they're younger, life skills. It's time for doctors to stop saying, oh, your kid ain't going to amount to anything. But put your kid in an institution. Like, there's a guy named Jonathan Martinez who talks a lot about decision making. Decision making is a muscle. You don't use your muscle, you lose it. Just like democracy is a muscle. Use it or lose it.
I love that. Yeah.
And John, and if you, I can send you information on the SDM if anybody wants. My email is nleblanc677@gmail.com. Plug my email.
Absolutely. So for everyone watching at home, I will include Nicole's information in the
consulting opportunities, 50 to 60 an hour, like 30 to 50 an hour. I'm open for business.
Yeah. So Nicole, obviously, what is one of the biggest misconceptions you think we currently have out there in the autism community?
Biggest misconceptions?
Yeah.
I would say, much like the rest of the district, ableism, and of course the whole, our whole thing about.
Did you say ableism?
Yeah.
You said ableism? Okay, got it.
And then of course the whole thing out there where, being disabled is burdensome. It's like, let's focus on providing services. And then of course you've got all the stuff people talk about, what causes autism? Like, I don't know, like, could it be, I've heard things about, air pollution, the American diet. Look how much crap is in our processed food. Like, for instance, they say celiac disease and gluten intolerance and all that stuff didn't start rising until they started putting glyphosate in that. Like, recently, within the last 4 years, during the time that since I've lived down here, I've been diagnosed with dairy and gluten intolerance. And my mother has lactose intolerance and right now is in the midst of slowly getting to the end of battling breast cancer. And my mother, she eats too much cheese, she'll be vomiting like crazy. Whereas me, eating dairy and gluten causes, tiredness, fatigue, diarrhea. It can vary. And celiac disease, I know, is linked to a lethal form of lymphoma.
Yeah. So, Nicole, Tanya, sorry. Hi, Tanya. Nice to see you on tonight. She writes, early intervention and help for girls must get that help early. Now, Nicole, we obviously know that early intervention, we're talking about those first 5 years somebody is diagnosed with autism. So boys are usually on average diagnosed at around 3.5, but that's really mostly white boys. Minority groups tend to be diagnosed later, and also girls tend to be diagnosed later. For people who might have a younger child who's a girl who's on the autism spectrum, Are the signs different from your knowledge for younger girls on the autism spectrum versus young adults and older adults who are girls on the spectrum, or are the signs really the same usually for the most part?
I would say, in terms of women, I would say, women, we're better at somewhat, mimicking, trying to, like act normal, like, okay, copy, or act normal, like, we try and, like, we stay, and quite often we like mask, we cover everything up till the point where social demands, like, I usually get tired when social demands get to be too much, where it's like, like, me as a kid, my parents were I've had, and if you look, many of the people right now that have an autism diagnosis were diagnosed with intellectual disability, formerly known as mild MR, and along with nonverbal learning disorder, ADHD, when they were young, and yet now all of a sudden, autism, as learning disability diagnoses right now go down, autism goes up. That's one statistic, in my career that people in the state of Vermont have noticed.
Yeah. Nicole, so there are a lot of people who talk about autism.
Parenting style, overprotective environment, like us, like I didn't I originally lived in Derry, New Hampshire for 9 years. We moved to Vermont in June '97, and that around the time when I finished 5th grade, moved into 6th grade, my last year of elementary school, and that's when I slowly started to academically bloom. I didn't really bloom until we, got out of New Hampshire. That was like, turning point. Okay, we're turning over a new leaf. Time for a change. Time to stop being the kid who runs through the halls like a devil. Yeah. That's what teachers wouldn't say. The one who turn off the lights in the teacher's room.
Yeah.
Call 911 just for the heck of it.
Really? Interesting.
I did that as a kid. Just to make you laugh.
You were a rebel.
Yeah, I'm one of those people who never sit still, when you talk to an ADHD.
Yeah. So, Nicole, one thing that I was just about to ask you, you have you're getting a lot of love in the comments. So, Nicole, did you go to college? And because you just mentioned education, what were some of your biggest challenges and your biggest strengths going to college, and where did you attend?
I graduated the Succeed program through, University of Vermont and Howard Center Developmental Services. I have a general studies certificate. I also was the first self-advocate to complete the Vermont LEND program, which stands for Leadership, Education, Neurodevelopmental Disabilities, funded by the Autism Cares Act, formerly known as the Combating Autism Act, one piece of legislation that me, along with Max Barrows from Vermont, we, pushed for to get rid of the term combating. Autism doesn't need to be combated. We need to combat negative attitudes, and we need to combat this pandemic as we speak.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely need to figure out the pandemic. So, Nicole, there have been people debating on where people with disabilities should fall in line in terms of getting the COVID-19 vaccine. And it's different for every state. What has your knowledge about those with autism getting the vaccine right now been? Have you been noticing a lot of people in your state getting them versus others with disabilities, or just not at all?
Well, vaccine access here in this state, and I'd say country, is like hit or miss. If you're like me, I got my first shot February 10th, and I'm getting my second one this week. But I got relatively easy because I'm one of those people who's like, so well known. I have, the privilege of having a high profile. I'm like, the one who everybody, will drop, help out when all hell breaks loose. Being so well known, I like, first I tried calling, okay, primary care provider. They say, oh, call Montgomery County, call the county government. Then, oh, no answer. And then I asked somebody who I know through a disability agency. And then they're like, sure, fill this out. We'll take care of you. No problem. Nice. Yet while that was relatively easy in my case, just from being on Facebook, there's so many people So many other people with even more significant diseases who are even at higher risk. I've seen that, are finding a vaccine is like signing up for it is like a full-time job. You know, getting a vaccine should not be a full-time job, and it shouldn't. Vaccine access should not depend on who has the most social capital, you know, who has the most privilege and whatnot, the loudest advocates in our life.
Yeah.
We need equity. This process has been, this pandemic there's so much inequity in here. Like, I have to ask right now, why are primary care providers, doctors doing vaccines? Just like, you could walk into get a flu vaccine, from a primary care doctor, not just a pharmacy. And yet, if we can get flu vaccine ready every August, why can't you get this done? Like, like every last several gazillion years, maybe except one, I can walk into a pharmacy, August, boom, flu shot, done. No problem, no hassle, no dealing with inaccessible websites, which government and as a whole, you need to make your websites accessible. The disability community is tired of the runaround. We are not disposable. Just like, and for the neurotypical world, you want to learn how to survive, you could learn a lot from the disability community and surviving, in terms of surviving this era of change we didn't ask for.
Yeah.
Like the isolation and all that, that's nothing new to many people in the disability community. Being blunt honest.
Elaine writes, what do you think about the Nicole, we lost you. You still there? Okay,
yeah.
Cool. Nicole, would you be able to move up a little bit?
I see her thing is in front of me.
Okay.
What do you think?
Elaine writes, what do you think about the use of the term autism acceptance over autism awareness? Do you feel there needs to be more acceptance in our society, country of individuals with autism?
It needs to become more the norm. It's time to stop fearing diversity. Get out of your comfort zone, America. Just like it's time to, stop, fearing, white people becoming a minority. All this racism, get out of your comfort zone. Like this obnoxiousness that we've seen in the last 4+ years, it's like, it's time to stop it. It's time to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's time to embrace intersectionality.
Hey, Nicole, could you move a little bit to your left?
Climate change and disability are not partisan issues.
Nicole, perfect. Good. Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, you're kind of cutting off a little bit. And your mouth is kind of cutting off right now with the banner. I apologize. If you could just move back just a little bit, I think you'll be okay. If you just move it back from your screen a little bit. And then just move yourself up a little bit. You can move your camera down and then you would be perfect. There you go. There you go. Awesome. Nicely done. Nicely done. Ashley writes, it's time to stop fearing diversity, period. I absolutely love that quote that you just said. So
we should mandate, in schools, mandate teaching civics, ableism, racism, social justice, intersectionality. There are no single issue. We don't live single issue lives.
Yeah. So, Meg writes, I can agree with that, Nicole. America, get out of your comfort zone. I agree, 100%. This comment comes in from Chad. Hey, Chad. And he says, I'm watching my 12-year-old nephew right now. He has autism. Nicole, what are some ways that family members can help a other family member who's on the autism spectrum, who might not necessarily be a parent, whether it's a grandparent, whether it's an uncle? What have been some of the things that you've noticed, especially in terms of the family dynamic?
Well, have high expectations, treat your son daughter, the same way you would anybody else, support them with accommodations. Don't be overprotective.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes failure can be a blessing in disguise.
Yeah.
School of hard knocks, as many of us have been through.
So, Nicole, what do you
Take
hope to?
risk, embrace it.
Absolutely. Nicole, so what was one thing, if you had to pick just one thing that you think helped you the most growing up on the autism spectrum, what do you think that would be? Whether it was a therapy, a friend who helped you through some of your therapies, what would be one thing?
Uh, I don't know. I would say, having, relatively good people all the way, plus having, strong family advocates. I look at my elementary and whatnot.
I love that. I love that. Family dynamic plays such a
Yeah,
huge
along with
part.
expectations, also play a role. Like
Yeah.
studies show, if you have, higher expectations of your kids, you're more likely to have better outcomes, particularly when we look at employment.
Yeah.
Like, families who expect their son or daughter to work regardless of disability are more likely to have better outcomes.
Nicole, so Ashley writes, my son was recently diagnosed. I worry I'm not doing enough for him. Is that during your consultations, do you notice a lot of parents mentioning similar comments?
What age group is her son?
Yeah, Ashley, if you could tell us what age your son
I just
is, he
want to
might
think,
have some.
okay, transition is this?
Yeah, but for just general, I guess for right now, Nicole, while we have Ashley right back to us, uh, what overall do you see parents' comments being? Is it that really they focus too much? They worry they're not doing enough. They worry that they're doing too much. Well, what have you seen as kind of the consensus there?
Well, the biggest thing is you need to fight for true inclusion. Fight for true inclusion in all aspects of life. Fight for things like peer mentoring. Get your son or daughter, in self-advocacy groups. Like when it comes to transitioning to adulthood, learn self-advocacy skills. Join a peer support group, so like a self-advocacy group with other folks with autism. Can help them. Increase disability pride. No, not always wish to be normal. Like, when I joined the self-advocacy movement, it was the first time I was like, wow, I don't have to be normal and always wish being normal. As a kid, I always felt like the odd one, being the oldest. When I dealt with a brother saying the R word, and I was trying to fit in and being that, one place where like you never fit in. So getting your son or daughter involved in self-advocacy, join a local self-advocacy group is one thing that's a must. Peer-to-peer connections. Green Mountain Self-Advocacy in Vermont was the best kept secret. I never learned about it till my 20s, yet it's been around since 1994.
Yeah.
Nobody in my high school said anything when I was in.
Nicole, is anyone watching from that organization tonight that you told about this? And do you want to give them a shout out?
Don't know.
Oh, you don't know, but do you want to give them a shout out anyway?
Howdy, Vermont. Bring on spring. You can keep the snow.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. What I loved what you just said about peer mentoring. Now, peer mentoring is really, really important in our community. And I often talk about peer mentoring. You could have a peer mentor as early as 5, 6 years old when you're starting kindergarten. When do you think is the right time for autistic people to receive a peer mentor? And what have been some of the benefits you've seen from autistic people having a peer mentor?
Any age, you can start, high school, elementary school, but adulthood is especially in time, particularly when it comes to, dealing with challenges, when we look at, things like, the unemployment rate in the autism world, dealing with, service system that doesn't necessarily meet our needs. Like, Voc Rehab does not do long-term support. It's like 90 days and they wipe their hands of you. Dealing with, all the bureaucracies and all that of, service system and all that. And right now, during a pandemic, right now, CMS, we should be investing in peer mentoring to deal with the mental health fallout and all the trauma, PTSD of this pandemic, given how botched and all that it was, because there is going to be a mental health pandemic after this. Even though I must say, Joe Biden has made me less anxious. Well, he made it, where we can all sleep at night. Like the week leading up to, the whole week of leading up to Biden's victory, I hardly got any sleep.
Yeah, well,
watching that January 6th thing, it's like, oh my God, that was like the most traumatizing. I'm like, God, what is this? Please wake me up.
Well, I'll leave politics off the table for right now, because I know that can become a very heated conversation. So we have a few more comments coming in. So Ashley, Nicole, we lost you again. You're like halfway up the screen. There you go. No, what I was going to say is Ashley came back and she said that her son is 6. I've gone in therapy and worked hard with him, but I always question what I could do differently. I'm also torn because his speech pathologist says, it's a she, sorry, says she thinks apraxia. Teacher says she doesn't see it. I just want the best for him. So it could be a guy, it could be a girl, but needless to say,
get a second opinion if you disagree with the diagnosis or recommendation or whatever.
Got it. Okay. Nicole, your consultations.
I had one time I was on one neurologist. She was like, "Oh, I don't think it's the medication. I think you should see a psychiatrist." I'm like, "Excuse me." And she was passive aggressive. When I was on Topamax, which has nasty side effects. I've been on Topamax, Tegretol, Lamictal, and those they often make autism worse. All the anxiety and all that, the mental health stuff. And just because, and if you ever have anybody who's diagnosed with seizures, make sure you do a video EEG. That way you can know whether or not it's actually epilepsy. If your son or daughter has seizures here, that are just like you get these tingling sensations and you stare into space, may not, let's say you'll just be frozen, you won't speak. That could be a sign that they may be psychogenic, especially if the person is still aware of their surroundings.
Yeah. Nicole, you mentioned you do consultations. When did you start doing consultations, and what have been some of the things that you do during those consultation calls?
Well, I'm just a policy wonk, doing advocacy stuff. I've done speaking engagements, like I'm keynoting at Wisconsin Employment First Conference. I've done fair housing testing. I'm part of the TASH AOD Disability Employment TA Center grant as a consultant.
Awesome. And for your speaking engagements, do you often talk about employment? What are some of the topics you like to talk about?
Dignity of risk, control your own destiny or someone else's will is my motto. Act or be acted upon. I talk about low expectation syndrome. I don't suffer from autism. I suffer from low expectation syndrome.
Yeah. We have a great question that came in from Julie. Julie writes, I'm tuning in a little late, so I'm sorry if this has been covered already. How does autism present differently in girls? So, Julie, we talked a little bit about that. But what I will say is you have a 2.5-year-old daughter who seems to be neurotypical, but obviously I'm hyper aware and looking for signs. for young children, what would be some advice you would give if you expect that there might be a few signs? Obviously, going in for a diagnosis obviously would make a ton of sense, but are there any other steps that you would take, Nicole, for this mother?
Join an autism support group, and then of course, there's, getting a psychological evaluation. And I don't know, it's always good to, look at, your family history. Like I've seen some studies that show, autism, bipolar, ADHD, anxiety, depression, they all share common genetic traits. So if one person has one condition, disability, chances are somebody else is going to have, one of those. Like if somebody has ADHD, chances are there's going to be other relatives. Same with autism, same with, like I have several relatives with ADHD, attention deficit disorder. I have, on my mother's side especially, there's a history of, there's schizophrenia, another psychiatric disability. I have one aunt who was diagnosed with bipolar in her 40s. Supposedly she's always had it.
Got it. Nicole, what's next for you? What are some things that you're looking forward to doing in the future? Do you have any short-term or long-term projects you're working on?
Well, continuing to do speaking engagement, and then of course, if anybody has any policy jobs out there, I'm open to business. Lobbying, any toolkits you want made, particularly as we look to, what is the post-pandemic world, the new normal look like after this nightmare?
Yeah.
But, the sooner we end this pandemic, the better. And we can all exhale and breathe a little.
Yeah. Nicole. Yeah. So Nicole, one thing that I wanted to ask you is, obviously, looking at the history of autism, we have the Leo Canners of the world, we have Hans Asperger, we have all these individuals who were some of the early people who were diagnosing autism and Asperger's syndrome. Who are some of the women on the autism spectrum, or just even scientists who have really helped this cause over the years?
Well, I love Greta Thunberg's audacity on climate change. Act like your house is on fire, Let's act like house is on fire and get rid of this pandemic. Come on. Climate change is real. Wake up.
Yeah.
It's a partisan issue for you people.
In terms of people who are a little bit the
one thing about Hans Asperger I don't like is the fact that the association of Nazis, especially after what we've been through, we're currently in this country. That's the most disturbing thing, personally.
Yeah. Nicole, so obviously in the autism community, we had Temple Grandin, who has been pretty well known since the 90s, and then obviously in the 2010s with the HBO film based on her life that came out, which was tremendous. Who were some autism advocates in the 80s, 90s? Just back in the day. Greta is obviously a teenager. Who are some other advocates who have really made an impact on the autism community throughout history, especially women advocates?
Question, I don't really know other than the people I know from ASAM.
And who are some of the people from ASAM? Because I know you know.
Julia Boscom, Samantha Crane, Kelly Israel.
Nice, awesome.
You got people like I know Dina Grassner, another autism activist.
Nice.
There's not many famous people I actually know. When I think of celebrities, I think of Temple Grandin. I think of Greta Thunberg.
Yeah.
Certainly. Even though you hear all these things about people think, oh, so and so had this, just like some say so and so president had this.
Yeah. So Nicole, what are some ways that people can stay in contact with you after tonight's Facebook Live? Obviously, we shared Nicole's email.
can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter. Always tweeting.
What's your Twitter handle?
Nicole12. My email is nleblanc677@gmail.com. And my cell phone number is 802-505-043.
No, don't share your cell phone number. Never, just as a recommendation for people who are watching this, I would never recommend sharing a contact information. Email is fine. There's been a lot of scamming within the autism community over the years. But if anyone would like to email Nicole directly, because this will live online and I don't want Nicole to be bombarded with 20 million calls, especially spam calls, share an email. And if you want to jump on a consultation and get on the phone, that would be incredible to get it and learn a little bit more about Nicole. Nicole, is there anything else you would like for people at home to know about your story?
Other than, embrace high expectations and, let's end ableism and let's use this crisis as a time to make the world more disability friendly. Especially let's use the time to end work disincentives, end poverty. Because let's face reality, we're going to have more people. The disability community is going to grow because of this pandemic. When we hear all this stuff about COVID long haulers, like I'm on one listserv that talk where I guess both rehab counselors talk about they're now seeing several people that are long haulers coming in there, and then there's even both rehab counselors that are becoming long haulers, I guess, as a result of this pandemic. Social Security and the government needs to decide, okay, is COVID long haul a disability? They need to classify and work ASAP, given the economic toll, and we need universal basic income. Let's get rid of all work disincentives and just allow everybody, pay everybody $1,200 or whatever a month to exist. Being disabled is expensive. Being disabled shouldn't be a full-time job. Neither should finding a vaccine.
Thank you all so much for watching tonight's Facebook Live with my esteemed guest, Nicole LeBlanc. This is the way that you can stay in contact with her via email. I'll leave it in the comments for everyone. And I thank you all so much for tuning in. Just for people who are just jumping on, this is my nonprofit organization, ran Carrie's Autism Journey. So if you would like to make a tax-deductible donation, you learned something new from tonight's Facebook Live, please give what you can, even if it's just a few bucks. That would be really appreciated. I include some information in the comments here. And we will be having a few webinars coming up as well. So just stay tuned to Carrie's Autism Journey. And again, reach out to Nicole in the future if you could use her support for anything. And thank you all so much and have a great night. Talk soon.
Adios. Bye.